You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I am UrzaMaster. With me, as always, are my two pals, Lord Uther, and today we have Master Blaster, runs Bartertown. Welcome, fellas.
Hello.
It's an MST3K reference. Got it. Is it?
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, 1985.
Ah.
There
Okay.
you are, there you are. Well, we don't need another hero tonight because we have
Hello.
a very, very wonderful episode of Strange New Worlds to talk about. Episode 3 of Season 2 released just today. Yes, we are recording this timely, folks, and there is a lot to unpack after this episode. Might be controversial, as some of our pre-show work has discovered among the crew here tonight. I'm very excited to talk about it. I think it goes without saying that I am probably the most enthusiastic about all of the Star Trek shows that have ever been made, minus the one we shall not name, that we've named many times before. I don't know why I'm obfuscating it now. But as always, I'd like to turn it over to Master Blaster for a little bit of background on this week's episode. Strange New Worlds.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther, and thanks to you at home. Yes, Episode 3, Season 2 of Strange New Worlds is titled Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. It was directed by Amanda Rowe, and it was written by David Reed, both of whom make their first appearances this season for the show. It was literally at times a two-hander, featuring and focusing on Christina Chong and her Lon Noonien Singh, and guest star Paul Wesley as Captain James T. for Tiberius Kirk. And they spend 85 to 90% of the screen time together in mid-2020s Toronto. Yes, you heard that right. They've gone north of the border and back in time to help prevent another disaster that could spell doom for the Federation and its subsequent allies. So we have Lon and we have Kirk, and they are trying to undo a puzzle in the present day, stripped of all of their advantages. They don't have phasers, they don't have tricorders, they don't have communicators, but what they've got are keen, inquisitive minds and a willingness to throw themselves on any investigative trail which leads them across the border to Vermont and then back to Toronto for the climax. And the villains here are the Romulans, and they are out to assassinate one Khan Noonien Singh, who actually makes an appearance in this episode. Hooray! But it's not the Khan you and I are thinking of, and it's not Benedict Cumberbatch. And we'll discuss more on that later and so forth. What also ends up happening in this episode is Lon and Kirk start to develop a little chemistry, a little electricity, a little bit of solar flare. And this is interesting because this is not the James Kirk from the accepted Prime timeline that we are used to following. He's spun off from an alternate reality, alternate origin story, and so forth. And so while their young love is kindling, it's always going to be a problem of how to resolve that once the crisis is averted. And we're going to talk about how that leaves an impact on Lon by episode's end. I want to start, before we get into the nuts and bolts of how we felt about the episode and how good a job they did, I want to start with talking about Paul Wesley as Kirk. So this is the second time he's gotten a really good turn around the camera. The first was season one's episode 10, A Quality of Mercy, the season finale, in which Christopher Pike took a tumble into an alternate timeline in order to save the Federation from the Romulans. So this show and that previous episode do have some similar DNA in terms of what they're up against. However, I will be the first to say that for a season finale in season one, they obviously brought out the big guns, big effects, high stakes, everything on the line, in which Pike teams up with Kirk, who's commanding the Farragut, as I recall, and they take on a whole Romulan armada near the neutral zone. And there's fisticuffs, and there's explosions, and there's all sorts of daring do. And it's really big, and it's really grand, and it's really like this really could affect the entire galaxy. And I think this episode, for me, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it certainly calls attention to that prior episode with some of its themes and what it's going for, and also, again, bringing Kirk, into the foreground here. So, taking a moment, we've done this before on the Warp Core with Ethan Peck and his masterful performance as Lieutenant Spock. I want to talk a little bit about how Paul Wesley is approaching this iconic character. Now, as a Star Trek fan, particularly of the films, I already had to go through this, as many of us did, back in 2009, when J.J. Abrams and the Bad Robot team rebooted Trek and gave us younger versions of the classic characters that we had all grown up and enjoyed watching. And it was Chris Pine who got to sit in the captain's chair in the yellow coverall. Now, I never felt that Chris Pine, in 3 films, I never thought that he ever matched the physical representation of Jim Kirk. I never once thought that Chris Pine was going to become William Shatner at some point down the timeline. But what I thought he nailed, for me, the sort of just go-to-hell attitude, the playfulness, and it was no better defined than how he behaves during the Kobayashi Maru scenario in that 2009 original, chomping on an apple with a devilish grin. I felt he captured the essence of James Kirk just in that one scene. And that's how I started adjusting my brain, knowing that we were going to start seeing all of this. Young Han Solos, young James Kirks, all of these prequels and requels and remakes and so forth. You no longer can think of it in terms of performer, like Shatner versus Pine versus Wesley. You have to think about it strictly in terms of the character. Does Chris Pine make me believe I'm looking at Jim Kirk? And is that how this fictional character, Jim Kirk, would behave in any given setting? And so the same goes here with Mr. Wesley. And I'm going to turn it over to you two to kind of get your impressions of how you think he's doing versus, let's say, Shatner, if we want to leave Chris Pine out of the conversation because we haven't really touched on the Kelvin films. How you think he's doing in terms of embodying the essence, the spirit, the humanity of Jim Kirk. And, you might contrast it with his co-star Ethan Peck, who's obviously doing a bang-up job, following in the footsteps of Leonard Nimoy. Do you find that they're sort of on an equal, performance level? Is Peck just heads and shoulders above what it is? Obviously, Wesley is sort of a guest star, doesn't get the same amount of time to flesh it out. But we've now seen him a couple of times, and we've seen him on the bridge, and we've seen him in Toronto. So I'm curious how you guys are taking to this new, soon-to-be Enterprise captain, and take it away.
I think that's a great place to start. I appreciate the Kelvin timeline for what it is. I thought the movies were somewhat entertaining, so we'll touch on those when we get around to them eventually, maybe.
Sure.
But the Chris Pine characterization of Kirk, I think leaned a little too heavily into the devil may care and didn't have the same gravitas that Shatner had in the original series.
Gotcha.
This portrayal, to contrast, I think gives us just enough of a dose. Now we have to remember this is an alternate timeline. This is a completely different upbringing for Kirk, but we get some of the whimsy, especially with the hot dog scene, which I thought was
Yes.
outstanding. I mean, I have to say that was probably my of the three favorite parts of this episode that I have. That was probably number two, because it's very Kirk, and like you think of William Shatner's whimsy, it was often pretty muted, but when he leaned into it, it was very well stated. That's how I felt this whole performance was in this episode. It was very like muted whimsy, more cautious, more calculating. Definitely came across as like an early TOS Kirk, where he's a little more by the book, a little less roguish, but also like, all right, we're gonna roll. We're gonna go with this, which I think, and this is like me going back and watching the original series, and when we do that, I think we'll all probably feel this way a little bit, maybe, but I think it's a very different Kirk than the Kirk we get in the films and later seasons of the original series. And so I think that in a way, I really felt like I was watching James Kirk in this episode. A different James Kirk, yes. And I think the nice thing is it's an alternate, right? So it's a suspension of disbelief that's a lot easier to make. Episode 10 of season 1, I was a little more iffy on that portrayal of Kirk. We didn't get very much of it, though. What I can say is it makes me kind of hopeful for the future of the series, because if we move beyond, let's say, the Captain Pike era and go to the early prequel of the original series, let's say, I honestly think Wesley could pull it off. I think you could see that transitional crew of moving from Pike to Kirk and seeing what we didn't see, because when we jump in with the original series crew, they're already an established crew. They've been out there exploring for an unknown amount of time. So I have a lot of optimism. I really appreciate it. In comparison to Ethan Peck, I think we need to see more of it to really say that one is better than the other. I definitely think if we're comparing what we've seen so far, Ethan Peck blows him out of the water. I mean, that Spock performance is... If you told me that's actually a young Leonard Nimoy, I would believe it.
He only had basically one scene this episode during Lon's security roundup, a humorous montage to open the episode. He gets one scene, and he absolutely nails it with, again, less than, let's say, 2 minutes of total screen time. I mean, there's comedy. It's like, I will relent from playing with such enthusiasm. I don't even know what he says, but he's got a noise complaint, and you can just see the look on his face, like, really? Someone's turning me in for no, like, it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
I know he has another scene later in the timeline where he's a Vulcan on a starship and they refuse to help him and so forth. But like I said, he doesn't need to do a lot to do a lot. And I just thought, that if that was the hot dog scene for you was one of your favorites, I think just Spock getting busted for noise was one of mine. Just absolute perfect. Mm-hmm. What do you say, Lord Uther?
Urza brings up great points that I was going to touch on, so I'm going to just take them a step further. If they're playing the long game, I agree with you, Urza. Bringing him in different, I guess I'm expanding upon what you said, but if we're going to drop him in at different points over the next couple seasons, I'm fine with that. But like the one thing I wrote down is, why are we bringing Kirk in now? Even though it's an alternate timeline, what's the purpose? Because to me, it distracts from continuing to learn and understand about this crew. Yes, I know we learned more about Lon, but I already feel like her backstory was already fleshed out, because we've heard it, and I'm not complaining, but we've heard it over and over and over, and she, she's constantly, she's consumed by it. So I get all that. That's almost why I didn't. It's almost why I didn't need this episode, is because I feel like we're kind of being beaten over the head with it in a sense. So if they're bringing Kirk, and I'm going to address the original Kirk question, but if they're bringing him in with the intent of 5 seasons down the line, he's going to be the captain, and we're going to see all that. That's great. Ethan Peck and the gal who plays Uhura are awesome. Like, I think they're both nailing it. And it's even a different Uhura that to me than we see in TOS or in the movies, but I still believe it's her. Is this Kirk? He's growing on me. So I guess that kind of goes to your point, Urza. He's kind of slowly growing on me. But this brings me to another problem. I'm sorry, I'm already diving into that, but I'm sick of the timeline jump stuff. It's destroy. No,
No, I know what you're saying.
yes, it's destroying movies. It's destroying TV. It's they keep rehashing the same thing. It's like, this is my problem with Marvel. I feel like talk about playing something to the very end, multiple universes and all this stuff, and then the Flash goes and does it. Like, I don't know how much more of that we need. Couldn't we have had an episode where we still had Kirk without doing this? Because this isn't even the Kirk from the right timeline. And why another timeline? That was my problem with the Kelvin timeline. I just don't. I don't know why we have to do that. Last point. I'm going to make an analogy to Fletch. So I saw the movie Fletch, and then this young man here, Master Blaster, was like, "Do you know that there are books about Fletch?" And I said, "I had no idea." So, back in the day, I went to my local library, checked out the books, and as I'm reading them, I could see Chevy Chase in my mind. Like, that's Fletch, not John Hamm. So, there we go. I'm thinking of... And look, John, I know you listen to the podcast. I know you watch it all the time. No offense to you. You're not Fletch. So, I think he needs to... Again, if they're going to play the long game, they need to sprinkle him in, but in this timeline, and stop. We don't need to be time traveling or multiversing, or just tell a good story. That's all you got to do.
I'll take
Well,
Go
that.
ahead, Ursula.
Yeah.
No, who wants to go at me? Let's do this. Come on.
I got to go tit for tat with this one because I love. This is a Star Trek trope. I mean, they did it in the original series, and they've done it very well many, many times throughout every Star Trek that there is, in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's on a holodeck, Q interference, Trelane, all of these folks introduce some sort of, oh, I see we're in the late 19th century, or whatever. I love that they brought in temporal investigations. It's one of my favorite parts of DS9 and Next Generation. And I think the whole La'an thing, I think there's a lot more there, and I think they needed this episode. I really do. Here's why. I think we need to understand why La'an is even on the Enterprise to begin with. That's something that, because obviously not in the original series, what's going to happen with her character? That's a big question here that they need to set up some kind of long-term payoff for, because she's a fan favorite. It's just going to, they can't just kill her off. It's like she couldn't just leave at the end of season 1. They couldn't just write her off like they did with, Soji. They literally had to do something with her character, and I think that building this isolated lifestyle because she's a Noonien Singh, obviously the connection to Khan, they have to put some kind of caveat in there. Like, there has to be some kind of twist and turn to her story to keep it interesting. The cool thing is, everybody wants to see Khan. There's never going to be enough Khan because you only see Khan twice. And, well, if we want to count Benedict Cumberbatch 3 times.
Right.
But you really only get Khan twice, and they're definitely working in a future Khan story. I think it's unavoidable. I don't know how they're going to do it, but there's going to be another Khan appearance at some point. Whether it ends up being that after the Pike era ends on this show, they go into a TOS reboot, let's call it, and we get a, space seed type story, I don't know. But I would definitely say that this is a great way to sort of build a bridge to that characterization. And the love story here, I think, is really potent because you get this other side that we wouldn't otherwise see of Lon. She's very guarded, very sort of private, kind of almost Klingon-ish, if you want to say she's sort of the Worf of this show. And that's something I always wanted more of Worf on Next Generation, and I think that's why DS9 was really successful with Worf in later seasons, because you had this sort of guarded Klingon you didn't know a lot about. You got quite a bit, but you didn't get a great picture. And when you put the two together, it's like, oh wow, Worf is such a great character. You really develop. That's why I was so excited to see him in Picard, because you develop this deep, abiding love for a character. Not a great dad, but otherwise really awesome. And La'an's the same way. Like, I didn't really care about her that much in season one, other than, like, is she a foil for the Gorn? Like, okay, this is how they're going to introduce the Gorn as the big bad. Yeah, all right, it's fine. But she's a Noonien Singh. Like, if you're going to give her that name, there's got to be a Khan connection. Khan is a great fan service. And I don't think it comes off as cheap either. I think it kind of helps tie in the whole Picard, with the Khan project, the Noonien Singhs, and sort of kind of is like putting the tendrils out there of how this sort of new multiverse of Star Trek, if you want to call it that, connects. And I know a lot of it is fan service, and a lot of it is trimmed down because they have to pack so much into an episode. 3 scenes, and not necessarily my favorite 3, but 3 scenes really set up an entire love story in this episode alone. Like, not even like full-on sequences, just shots almost. When La'an's standing there looking at Kirk sleeping, and you get this, like, the whole sense of that scene, that one shot is just this deep, longing gaze. And you're like, you kind of got a little bit of the sense that there could be some romance as it got to that point. But that was like the turn of a hinge. Or the turn of a hinge. Hinges don't turn, my friend. The opening of a hinge. Good Lord, my metaphors are great today. That was really like opening the treasure chest. Like, now we're bearing some soul of La'an that, again, on the Enterprise with Captain Pike and the rest of the crew, unless they start setting up a romance between her and Una, that, please, I don't think you'd see that side. And the Kirk connection makes sense. Think of it this way. Khan is Kirk's ultimate enemy. La'an is Kirk's ultimate romantic interest.
Now
where it's actually a mutual romance versus, like, his one-offs with the Orion slave girl. Like, that is something that I think is really cool, and it makes for a new Kirk. And you even get, like, a little hint at the very end of the episode when she's talking to, the actual Kirk in the real timeline. There might be a little something there. Like, oh, hit me up at the next starbase. I'd love to tell you some stories. It's like, that is the track to Colin the Plumber, my friend.
And that is Kirk swagger, too, to do something like that.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like you got the proper Kirk, I guess, in a sense. It wasn't the timeline kind of Kirk.
It doesn't matter how many episodes or whatever, how many women, like, it's just, by the end of it, they're probably smooching. Like, that guy he turns it on, like you say, whether it's the Klingons, the Orions, or that guy's just got chemistry. So a couple of things off of what Ursa was saying about the Khan thing, something that just occurred to me and something that I'd been thinking all along. So I just as intuitively felt that when we saw that door open, it was going to be a child. And I thought that really lets Lon and the viewer sort of off the hook, right? Because who wants to see her execute a cute kid, right? I mean, regardless of where actually he was in his development and everything else, that's fine. But it could have had, and I'm not disagreeing with the way they went, but you could have had even more potency if he seemed like he was like, an angry 19-year-old young man. Like, it made it easier for her to make her choice, even though he ends up starting the eugenics war and millions die and the universe is plunged into a dark place. You say to yourself, and we've said it all along, what if I could go back and kill, a dictator in the past and avert all of this? Like, she doesn't really, they don't really have to have her wrestle with that in the end. Now, obviously, she was never going to pull the trigger on her ancestor regardless, but it gave Lon a sort of an easier way out to have him be this frightened young boy instead of a glimpse of the malevolence. I mean, it would be like going back to use Uther's favorite Star Wars movie, The Phantom Menace. It'd be like sending back a Jedi to behead 10-year-old pod racer Anakin Skywalker right after.
Oh, I'd have no problem with this.
Well, no, I know you guys would call
Hated
for
that
it.
actor.
But Jake Lloyd. But what I'm saying is, nobody wants to kill the kid, right? It's only when he grows up to be more of a snot-nosed 19, 20-year-old that we really start, and he starts killing Tusken Raiders. But again, we're getting off track here. My thing is with Khan, I like what they did with it. I like that he was vulnerable, given that we know what the character will become. I just think that there's not much of a decision she really has to make in her. Like, there's no self-doubt. She prevents the Romulan from carrying out the assassination, but then there's that moment where she's like, I've got a gun. Do I do it? Do I do it? And I just never felt that the character was really pushed to that level because, again, you're not going to put a bullet in a 10-year-old's head. As far as the Romulan assassin, and again, you can't spend all your money on every episode. I get it. But again, I contrast this with the quality of Mercy, where it was full on Romulan on Federation, mano a mano. We had basically an actress who did a fine job, disguised as a human, so we saved a lot on makeup. Basically the conflict came down to Lon and her fighting in an abandoned corridor, back and forth. And so I just thought that the stakes of ultimately what this episode was trying to get us to never felt as pitched as they did in the season finale. And I concede that the season finale is going to put out all of the big fireworks. So I'm not saying that this had to do that. I just felt that it felt lesser, right? And I think that leads me to my point on this episode in terms of ultimately where I came down on it. As a writer, if this had been on Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, this would have felt right in with a 22 episode season, because you can't be all gas, no brakes for a television show, no matter who your audience is. Ask Kiefer Sutherland and 24. You have to have different tones, right? You have to have comedy. You have to maybe do a Halloween like horror episode where there's like, the gore around the corner. You have to do drama, the courtroom drama, and talk about the ethics and morals of Starfleet. I mean, you have to balance that out. And in a 22 episode season, what some people might call filler is actually, if you go back and watch some of those episodes, your favorite episodes that featured Riker or Geordi or Barclay, like, you got depth. You got more slices to the onion. You got those actors a chance to, shine and take center stage. And so I think this is a necessary, to Ursa's point, it's a necessary episode for Lon. I think her final scenes after the temporal police basically tell her, none of this happened, you can't talk about it, and don't make us come back here to say otherwise. Her grief and anguish at realizing that she's basically someone she's made a connection with, someone her heart has felt stirrings for, someone she watched die in her arms. I mean, again, we kill Kirk in the past. Like, Christina Chong, that was heart-wrenching to watch. Like, she just basically broke down on camera and did so in a way that I didn't feel like she's acting. I felt that she was just an absolute, here's a character again who keeps up a facade and just absolutely letting it go. So I think for that reason alone, the episode is absolutely worthy of the time and trouble it took, in terms of it. But what happens is that feels better in a 22 episode season. We only have enough runway here for 10 episodes, right?
7 episodes left.
Well, 7 after tonight, right. So
right.
The thing is, like you just have to make sure that, you're getting that balance. You're featuring, like I say, one episode's Uhura, one episode is Mabenga and Chapel. Like everybody gets their due. That's great. But I just felt like this one, I don't know. It would have felt stronger to me had there been more room, a longer narrative arc that we were building out, so forth. I feel like now, like I say, now we only have 7 left to tell whatever story season 2 ultimately wants to tell. Is it a Gorn War? Is it Pike still wrestling with the future that is upon him? Is there going to be some other crew dynamic, a Spock love triangle? Like whatever story season 2 ultimately wants to tell us overall. We only have 7 more great episodes, I hope, to get there. And so, like I say, with Lon, I think it really didn't catch fire for me until that last act where A, that we finally revealed what we were after, and B, like I say, she basically just let the tears flow and the pain and the anguish. I felt that. I felt that sting, and I thought that was really well done of her, of Christina Chong. So
I kind of felt like the Romulans were just. I felt like it was just kind of thrown together. I mean, there's no real. I mean, I know what the purpose was, but now the Romulans are traveling. So did she just travel back in time? Was there a ship out there somewhere? And then my last thing was, why not just send an agent to do the job, even though the other agent was killed? There was really, to me, I didn't know what the justification was for it to be Lon. Can one of you help me with that? I mean, why not just send another temporal agent back?
Well, and that was the speech the temporal agent gave to her at the end of the episode. It was like, nobody could have done this job the way you did it.
right,
It was her unique connection with Khan, and the fact that she's a Noonien Singh that like regrets, the family legacy, because the whole stigma is like, and they sort of set this up with Una's trial in the last episode, that the fear with her is that like she's predisposed or genetically disposed to being the next Khan.
genocide, right?
And she's not a genocidal maniac, so like she really is the only one truly quote unquote equipped to sort of rise to the level of what they needed here. I think that's what they're going for. I also think you have to build the Romulans up as a legitimate threat. And there has to be some sort of a deep mystique to it, too. And what's more mysterious than how in the hell did the Romulans get there? Oh, we built a compute. Well, of course, there's some silly explanation, which, you know what, you buy it, you don't buy it. It doesn't really matter. It's not material to how they're setting up the Romulans. Is that there's sort of this unknown, deep, scary presence. Because remember, she shows up as human, but nobody's seen a Romulan from Lon's timeline. Only Kirk is like, no ears, and it's like, yeah, you're getting used to the ears. They're the only ones who really kind of know like what a Romulan looks like. Lon doesn't. Nobody's seen a Romulan in forever, and that was the big thing in the season finale
with Spock, because when they first saw a Romulan, they had the pointed ears. That's right, I remember.
Yep. So I mean that was a big deal. But yeah, I mean, in some respects, I'm kind of waiting to see what episode 4 does, because I feel like they're setting up Pelia and La'an to have something greater than what's going on. Because Pelia was there, so she's going to know, like, she's going to be in the know. And that's something they can tap into. Sorry, there's a fly buzzing me. For later storytelling in this season. And I think it's going to be material because it's no coincidence. Like they don't. It's not just a literary device they're setting her up for. You wouldn't pay that kind of money for that actress to just make her be like, oh yeah, she just happened to be in Vermont. Like, there's something a little more important here. The fact that Lon knows her and would have thought to do that, and had
which
the
was
equipment,
clever.
and then
Which
of course,
was clever. Yeah.
and of course, Kirk,
we've been robbed of a good Pike Pelia scene so far early. I'm hoping we'll get that later because she's so eccentric. And I just want to see Pike reacting to her eccentricity in real time, just with the voice and her mannerisms and her. He kind of turned away and said, can security step in here, kind of a thing. But I'm looking for a good one-on-one somewhere in there, maybe when he's cooking dinner or something. Like, I just want him and her to kind of share a moment, and I just want to see Anson Mount kind of give her like, really, like, just. So I think that I'm looking forward to that when it happens.
So, and I think, and not to cut you off, Lord Uther,
You're good. Go ahead.
I know you want to respond, but
You're good.
we've kind of been talking the last season and somewhat with Picard too, when we kind of reach these episodes where we're like, feels like filler. And I could see the argument be made that, like, is this really an episode that adds something to sort of the overall story of this season? Because there's always one or two where you're kind of scratching your head, like, is this just like a monster of the week? Is this the first half of a two-parter? Is episode 4 going to be some kind of companion, even if it's just a tertiary companion? Maybe.
I'm missing Pike, and I'm missing. Here's what made season 1. I'm sorry. There's a lot of things that are great about season 1. Here's the one thing I just bought into, and it's conversations, Urza, that you and I have had before. The episodes I really liked, or the scenes I really liked, is when Pike would have them all gathered in his quarters and having those moments of, like, he's cooking for them or having those discussions. I feel like we really haven't seen that yet this season. And I think that's one of the things that made his character in season 1 special. And we said this last episode or before that as well. It takes guts not to have him be at the forefront of the past 3 episodes too. I think it takes some risk. So, to your point too, there's got to be some payoff to keeping him off screen. There's got to be a reason for that, and moving the story forward in a sense. And what's that going to be? So at least I'm curious about that. And after hearing some of your explanation, I can see how the episode might be a little bit stronger than I originally thought, but I still had my struggles with it.
That's fair.
Sure. Get him. No, just kidding.
Well, all right, that's the warp core. So, I think one thing that we haven't talked about is the fact that we've got an unfolding sort of. I don't even know how to like phrase it, but like we've got an unfolding sort of web of romantic intrigue unfolding on the Enterprise. And I think that's one thing that Star Trek has always done really well, is setting up, these sort of romantic interests, whether it's Geordi LaForge never quite being able to figure out like how he's going to move his romantic life forward, and then boom, suddenly 20 years later we see him with kids and all this stuff, which is wonderful. But we've got this whole ass Enterprise, and we got to remember, like, this is one of the first exploratory ventures into deep space. Close quarters, romance. I mean, it's the old joke about the Navy, right? When you're out at sea, things happen. It's the same idea here, and you're going to get hurt feelings. You're going to get, a lot of the William Riker type stuff that we've belabored in the past, like some calling of the plumber here and there. We've also got a pretty diverse crew, which is something that, of course, we've had in prior Star Trek shows, but we haven't really tackled the unique romantic entanglements that I think a modern audience is a little more accustomed to, or maybe inclined to view. And I think Ortegas sets that up nicely. I think Una sets that up nicely. Chapel, Spock. I mean, there's a lot of interplay with this crew, which I think kind of does take us back to that original series crew where it's a little more, I don't want to say like rigid and like, you know, stiff upper lip, but we think of Uhura in the mess hall, right? In the early first season of the original series, you know, she was kind of like the entertainment in the Wild West, you know, the lady of the Wild West entertaining the room full of fellas, but having fun with it. And it wasn't overly sexualized or anything like that. It was just her being empowered and being, you know, featured. And now, you know, that's kind of old hat, is empowered women. not to downplay that. It's still important, still very necessary, but now we've got a really unique opportunity to set up like really truly layered kind of interpersonal relationships and explore them in strange new ways, let's say, that just tells compelling stories, like a very deeply guarded, alienated, struggling person who's trying to keep that very professional stiff upper lip appeal and yet is clearly in love with Captain Kirk now. I mean, it just is. And again, this is a character that is not in the original series, so there's going to be a payoff. Just like Mbenga, there's gonna be a payoff. Lest we forget, like, Mbenga's really playing the role of almost like the Doctor on Voyager on this show, where he's sort of in everybody's life. You know, he's got the backstory with Chapel, he's got the backstory with Lon, he's got the backstory of his own. Like, we're getting real depth of character in such short sequences, and here it is, you know, fans. What great writing! I mean, again, whether you think this episode is one of the strongest outings or not, the writing is just, it's really on point for what it is when you think of it as just a singular entity of an episode. I mean, I gotta say, I continuously am impressed with what they're putting out in snippets, really, of what could be full episodes. Like, this could be a 6-part episode in any other Star Trek series, you know, or a 3-parter or something. There's also the possibility we might see Q at some point. I want to throw that out there.
You never know.
I love it.
And I know we're going to rate it out of 7 warp cores, but if this is the one mediocre episode so far, I'll take it. Because it's still, in my eyes, it's still a testament to the incredible work they've done. So if this was a little bit slower paced of an episode, or just a little different, whatever, they have enough brownie points with me that I'm fine with it.
To use a Kirk analogy, I mean, it's like a hot dog. I mean, even if it's bad, it's still really good. So, I mean, there's no, yeah, I mean, let's not, they didn't disabuse themselves. They didn't embarrass themselves as far as the franchise goes. I just felt, when watching it, I just felt like I was watching an episode from a much larger narrative quilt versus
like a longer season.
Right, knowing that the acceleration of a season when you only have X amount of hours to compress and tell the story, like I said, I was just sort of like waiting at the starting line, like, all right, let's go. So, but I don't think what they gave us was in any way undernourished or ill-conceived, per se. So, I mean, again, how much time can we spend in mid-20s Toronto? I mean, all the time it takes to get a good story. So,
I did like the name drop of poutine.
Yes.
Thank you, Canada.
Oh yeah.
And gravy, absolutely.
Love it. Well, I think now is probably a good time because we've been hinting at it. Let's go ahead with our ratings. 7 out of 7 warp cores. I think this week let's kick it off with Lord Uther because he's got a lot to say.
I had a lot to say. I'm gonna go. But the problem is, I already knew it. I know what Master Blasters is because we were talking about it earlier. But I think I'm going to go 4.5. Yeah, I'm going to go 4.5 out of 7. And it might seem kind of harsh to our millions and millions of fans, but just for me, again, in a season that's just only 10 episodes long, I I I question putting this type of episode in there, and I'll leave it at that. And I'm missing that Captain Pike too.
He
Which
wants
again,
some
hopefully
fun.
that's just setting it up for he's gonna have heavy involvement, obviously coming up here.
All mount all the
Master
time.
Blaster.
So I'm going to leave you out on a limb now, Lord Uther. UrzaMaster talked me into a full warp core higher than my original thought here.
Wow.
He made cogent arguments, and I'm open-minded enough to accept them. So, but I am going to give it 5.5 warp cores. Like I say, just approaching it from a writer, I don't think what we got was a bad episode of Star Trek by any means. I just felt, third episode in, as we said, we spent the first episode with Spock stealing the Enterprise. We spent the next episode with a tense courtroom drama. I'm still looking for those seeds, even though this is definitively not a strong serialized narrative as we've seen in season 3 of Picard, for example, or any of the seasons of Picard, I suppose. Like, I get that we're doing this more with the character pieces and episode of the week types. I understand that. But like I said, I just felt watching it like not until the slam bang act 3 sort of final confrontation and resolution and epilogue did I really feel like I had been fully embraced by this episode. Hot dogs in Toronto are great, but I'm looking for those moments that can soar or break your heart. And I think Lon delivers the breaking your heart there at the end. So I think that was a nice revelation. And let's hope we can see, like Ursa was saying, the idea that Kirk could be in love with, the relative of his, most vicious enemy. Like, that's great. I hope you're listening, Henry Alonzo Myers and Akiva Goldsman, because put that on the whiteboard. That's a keeper right there. So, UrzaMaster.
And I, ever the optimist, will not be giving it 7 out of 7 warp cores. I give it a strong 6 out of 7 warp cores. I love this episode from top to bottom. I do have a strong distaste for Monster of the Week episodes, but as Master Blaster pointed out, those are often the episodes that, when looking back on the series as a whole, you learn to appreciate quite deeply. I look back at the first episode with the Thule in Supernatural. I loved that. That's what got me into the whole series. Went back and rewatched everything up until that point and fell in love. If you were coming into this show and it's your first time watching it and you see this compelling love story unfold, which I think it really was, you would want more. It leaves you wanting more. And it's a double-edged sword, because I want more in a bad way too. I want a little bit more outside the main meat and potatoes here. I'd love to get some intermix, which we get in the television series episode styles, where they can have the main story and then every so often get a 3.5-minute cut over to what's the rest of the crew up to. There's no, where did Lon go? It's like, that would have been something that on a TV, if this were a TV episode and much shorter, but we still got over an hour's worth of Star Trek. Basically a romance film about a Captain Kirk and a Noonien Singh, which I love that idea. He fell in love with his basically arch enemy's long lost relative. Like, that to me is, I love it. The other thing is, I don't know, this fly is driving me crazy. I don't know that season 1 made me care about Lon as much. I loved it. I love season 1. I was intrigued by her character, but I was kind of like, what are they going to do with her? She's a Noonien Singh. Like, they mentioned Khan like one time, and I was like, is this going to be it? Like, I want a little more payoff there. I finally got it. And I finally care about this character, I think, in the way that, like Ethan Peck's Spock, you care about Spock from instant number 1. You care about Anson Mount's Pike from instant number 1. pretty much all the other characters on the show, like I have an instant chemistry with. I didn't quite feel it with Lon because it just felt. I was a little worried. I was a little worried that they just injected a Noonien Singh because you got Brent Spiner's brilliant performance in Picard, and of course Khan being Khan. Anytime you can give that kind of fan service or have that kind of tie-in, you almost have to, right? Especially if you want to make the money. This goes beyond fan service. This goes beyond money. This really tells me that they're actually committed to building a brand new character that fits in the canon in a way that's going to be interesting. Now, I'll be real pissed if we get to the end of this series someday and they don't do anything substantial with this character because... F off, man. You don't set up a really great Kirk love story like this and not have some kind of payoff. Now, let's just say, typical swagger Kirk gets intermixed here with her in the future and it just doesn't work out. I could see that. But I'd actually be better with that than I would be with having like some sort of flat line of her character in the future. And that's why I go back to the writing. They don't have the turmoil and the infighting that other Star Trek series have had. And I think that's where we're going to get the payoffs we want. And, we so rarely see that in films and TV where you kind of just feel like they've treated these characters in the way that I really wanted it to pay off. Only one other film series I can think of just off the top of my head that delivers on that punch. And it actually has kind of slid up my ladder to like probably my number one trilogy of all time. So I'm not going to discuss it here because this is a Star Trek show. But suffice to say that Star Trek is causing some waves for more than just Strange New Worlds. And Master Blaster, I'm going to turn it over to you because there's some pretty big current event type stuff when it comes to streaming services, and Star Trek in particular is now sort of fallen victim to this trend. Fill us in.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. So, the streaming wars began in earnest in 2019 when Disney Plus and Apple Plus and Peacock and everyone rose to challenge Netflix for supremacy. And the promise was, tune into our networks and we'll give you content and library and old titles and new material, and you'll pay $10 a month and we will give you brand new Marvel adventures on Disney Plus and brand new Star Wars adventures. And over on Peacock, we'll give you a lot of library titles and hit movies that premiere the same day as theaters. And over in Paramount Plus, it was the home of Star Trek, right? So for the Star Trek fan and for the Star Trek newcomer, it was the opportunity to see brand new content like Discovery, Picard, Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, Star Trek Prodigy, which we'll discuss in a moment. It was also a chance to see classic Trek, all underneath one umbrella. The original series, Deep Space Nine, The Next Generation, Voyager, Enterprise, the animated series, all of this. And so there's this implicit promise that if you pay me the $12 a month, beautiful.
Wow.
If you pay me the $12 a month, then at 4 a.m, if you wake up jonesing to watch DS9, you can just hop on the computer or the TV and turn on Captain Sisko and Kira and Odo and Dr. Bashir and all your favorites.
Dax,
don't forget Jadzia Dax. And that's kind of what we were expecting. But then the streaming wars cratered out as Wall Street looked at the numbers and said, well, wait a minute, you're spending all this money on original content and all of where's our cut? Where's our share? How come Disney shares and Netflix shares and Paramount shares are all in the doldrums? So it was Warner Brothers and their Max service that kind of kicked this unhealthy trend off in the last year. And they realized that if they removed content from their streamer, if they literally erased it from memory, that they wouldn't be responsible for it on their taxes and they would get a nice write-off. So it became not so much about, let's say, canceling shows. Like, okay, we're not going to do any more Star Trek Strange New Worlds, or we're not going to do any more Picards. It wasn't just a sense of like, we're not going to put money and invest it in new material. We're going to take some old material from the streamer. I mean, stuff that maybe you just haven't had time to catch up on yet, or you wanted to revisit, and we're going to remove that too. So now no one can watch it, right? It's not available anymore. If you were to go to Paramount Plus this evening, the animated series Star Trek Prodigy, which last month was available, you had 20 episodes. It was an animated team up between Paramount and their sister company Nickelodeon, which CBS Viacom owns, and it had a great voice cast. It had names. It had Ella Purnell, who was in Yellow Jackets, D. Bradley Baker, who's worked on the Star Wars animated series like the Clone Wars and Rebels and the Bad Batch. John Noble, who was the Mad King in Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King and in Fringe, and Kate Mulgrew reprising her role as Admiral Janeway. So, this wasn't second-rate stuff. It was part of the canon of Trek, and it was one of the first shows that Paramount Plus, following in the Max's footsteps, removed from their platform entirely. Now, will it eventually resurface someday somewhere else on Netflix or Pluto or, a DVD bin that they've put a physical copy out now? Because those are going away too as everything switches to streamers. You're having less and less of the physical content, not as much enthusiasm as there is just to go digital. But I feel like there's been a sort of a new restating of the relationship between fans, between audience members, between paying customers, and these streamers who, like I say, with just one swing of the hatchet, can take away some of that content that you support, that you enjoy. Disney Plus removed the Mysterious Benedict Society, which was a delightful show based on the young adult book series, and Willow, the Lucasfilm follow-up to Ron Howard's hit, got one season. And again, it's one thing to say we're not going to make any more Willow episodes. Okay, you've chosen that financially and creatively. But then it's another thing to say the 8 episodes we did make with lavish special effects and guest stars and trying to branch out that saga, we're just going to take them off and you'll never see them again, unless somewhere down the road an opportunity presents itself for us financially to benefit. So I just throw it out to you guys, the fans. Again, we're not going to carry torches and pitchforks out to the Melrose gates of Paramount anytime soon. But just this idea that if they can just go in arbitrarily and just decide, okay, we're not going to show Voyager anymore. It's one of our lowest rated on the platform. We know that UrzaMaster loves checking it out on the weekends, but forget it. Like, I'm just wondering if this is something that bothers you, if you just say, hey, they're writing the checks, they get to make the call. I was just curious about it, because as a writer, as a content person, if I had worked on something and then suddenly it's just not there anymore, and it's not like, yeah, it's off for a week and we'll bring it back. It's like, it's gone. It's in a void. It is in the vault. Forget it. I think that would bother me significantly, and so I throw it up to either of you on a jump ball there.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with the word the vault. Disney did the same thing for many years. They cut physical releases of movies. Snow White, Little Mermaid, all of those classic movies that we loved as little kids got vaulted. You couldn't get them. They didn't release them on DVD until way, way later. You could only get the VHS tapes. So if you wanted a good quality copy, you were screwed until they released the expensive new edition. And likewise, they revaulted it after those releases. And, it was very hard to come by it until now. They've kind of released everything and, it's readily available. And Amazon, for all its flaws, has made it very easy to get a lot of that material because it's very lucrative to sell your physical media on there, which I would strongly urge fans of anything to buy the physical media. always, if there's a physical media option, buy that. I would way sooner have a physical game, movie, CD, vinyl album than I would get some downloaded version. First of all, downloaded files are easily corruptible. The internet will not last forever. Physically speaking, it's going to eventually someday come to a collapse or have to be completely revamped, and a lot of stuff is going to get lost. That Space Jam website that's been up since like '96, it's not going to be there forever.
Oh, yeah.
And it's still there, by the way. You can go to that website. But that would be my strongest urging, is support physical media. I mean, that's why I went out and spent the coin on the animated series. Not only because I'd never seen it and I really wanted to, but, unfortunately, the good old days of online piracy, which I grew up in, you can't get the nice, reliable quality stuff that you used to get with flying under the radar and not getting poached for copyright. I'm fortunate enough now, I have a little extra money now and again to get stuff like that. But that's where I put my money. I choose to put my money into physical media because I know they can never take that away. At the end of the day, does it take up space in my house? You betcha. But it's something that no platform is ever going to remove. I get the artwork, which is something that you can't compare. Sure, there's plenty of images on the internet, but to be able to see and feel and touch things like this copy of Shenmue for the Dreamcast, or this of one of my many copies of Super Mario Brothers Duck Hunt, like, and all the other piles of crap in my office, like, this is stuff like nobody can ever take that from you. I mean, unless you're in a hoard situation and maybe it's time to give up some of that stuff, but. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
there's always going to be the money interest. Capitalism is a thing. It's likely here to stay, at least for the time being. Money talks. And yeah, they own the content. It's their, IP. They can do with it what they will. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of Prodigy. I wasn't heartbroken when it went away. I'm sure there's going to be money to be made there because, like, vaulting it for Disney, they're creating artificial demand. And when demand gets great enough, they'll find a way to monetize it. That's all they're doing, is they're pumping you for every last dollar. It's the same thing they do by adding, Cinemax to your streaming package for only an extra $14.99 a month. Well, sorry, I have all the physical copies of all those Skinemax movies I used to love when I was 15 years old, because I'm smart and buy a physical media, or may or may not have some bootlegs. But like, that's the thing, is like, it's a swindle. It's a big swindle. They're waiting until there's enough clamoring. What we should really be fighting for is not necessarily their ability to take it from streaming, but we should be forcing them to release physical releases of all this stuff, which segue to a little advertisement for Paramount Plus here. The Picard collection is coming out October 17th this year. It's about $240, but you get everything that features Jean-Luc Picard. All of the movies, all 3 seasons of Picard, the entire series of Next Generation, a bunch of extra art. You get the music. You get, I think there's a booklet that comes with it with some story and some background. You get like 3 or 4 DVDs or Blu-ray copies. I think they're Blu-ray copies of like just behind the scenes bonus shit. Yeah, bet your sweet ass what I'm buying myself for my birthday this year. So don't sleep on this. This is your chance. Don't let them steal this from you like they may. Don't let the streamers win. Go out and get yourself the physical media. And now I'll turn it over to Lord Uther.
Yes. First of all, there is a Space Jam website, and I didn't know that Sean Bradley only played 210 games in his career. Anyway, Andy's 50 years old right now. Here's what's going to happen.
Cherry Poppin' Daddies cassette. Sorry.
Here's what's going to happen. Me being the history guy. People are going to cancel. A couple of these services are going to go under. Someone's going to buy all the content from the services that go under. They're going to strike a deal. And you're going to go from 7 or 8 streaming services down to 3. I mean, I just did it with, I have Comcast. I was paying way too much, because we're also in that situation too. I sat down, I'm like, wait a minute, we've got Disney Plus, we have Netflix, we have Amazon. I know it comes with Amazon Prime, but whatever. We have Hulu, we have Disney Plus. We might have one more. So that's 6 streaming services, right? So I was probably paying an extra anywhere from $50 to $60 a month. Actually, Paramount Plus comes with my Walmart yearly subscription. Anyway, but I'm like, why do I have Comcast? I don't need it. We can get everything we want from all those services. So I cut out Comcast, right? What's going to happen? I'm going to eventually get rid of a couple of these streaming services, and then you're going to get again. You'll have it kind of like TV, where we have ABC, NBC, CBS. Same thing's probably going to happen. You'll have 3 good streaming services. And I think you are going to see a revolution where all that stuff's going to go back to physical media. And I'm going to give you the one thing that's probably going to help that, which, Urza, you have a whole bunch of them. Vinyl right now is so popular. I think you're going to see DVDs or Blu-rays or 4K rays or DVD, whatever.
Spin the black circle.
Physical. You're gonna see that all come. I think you're gonna see that make a comeback. I mean, you and I were in a tizzy because when we bought Diablo 4 to play the game, we couldn't get a physical copy. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. What does it cost to put that on a DVD or 2? I mean,
like $2.
Right, exactly.
$2 in materials.
Give me the physical copy. Plus, and this is something that Master Blaster had brought up to me years ago when we went to see Twin Peaks Fire Walk with me, and he goes, you got to go see it as many times as you can. I'm like, why am I going to pay to go? He goes, you got to support the movie. You've got to, and I think that's the other thing it does too, right? It shows the support. And I think, again, to Master Blaster's point, the C-suite people that aren't really in a part of it or have a love for it, the money that those shows generate through the physical media, that's going to justify it for them, right? Like they don't totally get it. Where you just put it on Netflix or Disney Plus and you've got all this stuff to select from, how do you really track that? I mean, obviously they probably track it internally somehow, right? But there's other ways to support it too and to try and keep it going. So yeah, that's how I feel about that.
And just to illustrate one final point about stuff making a comeback, and I'm just going to throw this out there because
Hello, Cool J.
I happen to have this stuff. And this is a shout out to the future. Specifically, the future was 8-bit at one time. This is a Commodore VIC-20 cartridge. Brand new. I bought last year. It's a Penultimate Plus cartridge. It has a bunch of games. It has, RAM expanders, all that kind of stuff. Same company produces for the Commodore 64. An Epix Fast Loader cartridge. These are brand new materials. They were, relatively speaking, inexpensive. They work with the original equipment. Atari 2600 just had a brand new game release for it. And yes, you can get it on modern platforms too. You can get physical and you can get digital copies of it. And the PS5 version is like worlds better than what you get on the Atari, of course. But, the Atari version is still pretty incredible. The play you get there is amazing. So don't be surprised if somebody says, you know what might be hot, that everybody can go out and spend very little money but would need to buy something relatively expensive to support that, let's call it a hobby, VHS.
Oof.
They don't make VCRs right now. Nobody does.
Right.
If somebody was enterprising
See what you did there.
enough to start putting out VCRs, I just bought a stack of the original series VHS tapes not that long ago for Star Trek That stuff's out there. There's a ton of it available. Nobody wants it. It's very inexpensive. What better way to make a bunch of coin really quick than say, hey, they're pulling this stuff off of streaming, but you can get the VHS down at your local Goodwill or St. Vincent de Paul or Salvation Army store for nickels. And hey, you buy this $100 VCR that I'm now producing that nobody else makes because it's a dead technology. A dead technology. That's a huge business opportunity. Then that company makes a bunch of money, goes public with an IPO, and now they're making all of the VCRs across the globe. People are like, yeah, the crap quality tapes. We could just make better tapes. Hell, we could make tapes that stand up to Blu-ray quality, which is better magnetic tape. And now you've got these streaming services saying, we want in on that money. We're going to release physical copies of Star Trek Prodigy on these brand new VHS tapes for your brand new VCR. I am UrzaMaster. That is Lord Uther. Master Blaster, thank you for joining us today. This is the 22nd episode of the Warp Core podcast, and we leave you with live long and prosper.